Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. Today's guest is Tom Papasian, if I pronounced that right. Like many men, Tom spent years believing that success and financial security would solve everything. But even after achieving them, something still didn't feel right. Today, we're exploring what happens and what he's learned along the way. So, Tom, welcome to the Midlife Men podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil.
So let's start in the south of France. You can start the story there. So on paper, that sounds idyllic, especially you growing up. But the reality was you were, your mother was a single mother. You had very little money. Perhaps you could start by talking about your early experience.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. So, yes, I am French. I know it doesn't really sound like it, and I hope you probably catch a glimpse of accent everywhere, every while and then. Grew up in the south of France in a very sort of privileged area, French Riviera. So when I speak to other people about the French Riviera, first question they ask me is, why did you move to Ireland? We can get into that a bit later, but obviously gorgeous weather, and you think of luxury and the yachts and all that stuff, but which is part of it. But for us, it was not necessarily our day-to-day life. Like you mentioned, I grew up with a single mother. She was very young as well. She had me at a very young age. She was 21 when she first had me. And we grew up in a one-bedroom apartment. She slept on a couch for 14 years, or she didn't have her own bedroom and so on. So, but I didn't know any different. So it was life at this stage, we had very nice surroundings, and we saw, I guess as a kid, I saw stuff that not a lot of kids would see, huge amount of wealth around us and supercars. And, you're talking about the top 0.1% of the world that comes every summer to spend their money and time there. So it was big contrast between our lives and what we saw in their life, and also my friends who I was hanging out with. It was a bit of a paradox of a place, if that makes sense, for somebody who's normal,
And so at a very young age then, did you realize that, your mum was struggling, financially and perhaps needed help? I mean, how did that shape you as a child? And eventually, the man you became? I mean, did you feel like you had to, help and provide and step up, early?
It's a good question. I guess from the age up until 5 or 6, life was normal. I guess it was just a normal kid. But I have a memory of being probably 7 or 8. And at that age, I was already coming home from school by myself, because my mom was just working, sometimes 3 jobs to be able to make ends meet. And there was an instance where I knew she was under pressure, but I couldn't quite comprehend what was going on. I knew it had to do with money, and I think it was the equivalent of the child support check that my dad was sending every month that hasn't come through, and obviously it probably made a huge difference in the budget for my mum. So I felt the pressure, and I remember I was probably 6 or 7 years old and deciding I was in our little apartment having a couple of biscuits after school by myself, and I decided that I was never going to let anyone dictate what our finances are going to be like. And I was never going to let my mom feel that way again, essentially. And with hindsight now, I know I didn't have all the context, I didn't have all the information, but just from a feelings perspective, it was like, I'm fed up seeing her like that. And money is the answer to that problem that she's currently having. So I'm deciding at 7 years old, I'm going to put on my big boy pants, and I'm going to make a difference and change that so that it doesn't have to happen again.
So do you think that you almost, lost your innocence quite young, with that realization at 7? How did that impact you in terms of, wanting to be self-sufficient, as you said, not relying on other people?
Yes, something that I used to take sort of pride in, and realize afterwards that it probably wasn't, exactly how it was supposed to be, is that I was very self-reliant. As I said, I was coming home from school after, a very young age, and be able to sort myself out until my mom came home. I wasn't causing any problem. I didn't want to add anything to her plate. quite young. And then when I get to my sort of early teens, I wanted to take more responsibility and be able to provide. That's not to say that all my focus was on this. So that wouldn't be fair to say. You know, I was obviously still a kid, and my mum was buying me the school clothes and what I needed and the shoes that I needed, and she did everything that she could so that I wouldn't feel like I missed out on anything. But there was a few instances where I wasn't able to go on a school trip. I remember there was a school trip that was getting organized, and it was a trip to America. And obviously, growing up in France in sort of the 90s and early 2000s, you know, America was sort of the dream. Like for any kid, you watch the shows and so on, and we just weren't able to make it. You know, and there was another couple of trips like that where the kids were going skiing, and it wasn't an option for me, and that was quite hard because I felt like I was missing out. But to go back to what you mentioned, yeah, a big sense of responsibility. I don't want to be I don't want to be any trouble for my mom. I'm not going to get into trouble. If I do get into trouble, she can't know about it whatsoever. And whenever I can, I'll contribute. You know, that was the sentiment, I guess.
So what kind of impact, you know, as you grow up, go through teenage years, you know, into adulthood, what impact do you think that has on, you know, your identity and your focus, you know, as growing?
Well, at the time, because I didn't know any different, all I wanted was to be free, in the sense that I didn't want anybody to rely on anybody for money, and I wanted us to be self sufficient and safe. But in my mind, you know, obviously as a kid, you just like you probably extrapolate too much. So it's like I want to be a millionaire, and I want to be, you know, as rich as possible, so that we never have to deal with that kind of uh, stress and pressure, because I wanted to relieve my mom. Essentially, I didn't understand what it meant and what it entailed, but it's an early decision that I made, and then I stuck to for probably 15 years after that. You know, it was all about money, safety, security. But it wasn't very clear like a goal. It was just, I need to make as much money as I possibly can so that we don't have to feel that way, so that, you know, if there's any issues, like this is sorted. And so it drove, I was getting disengaged in school towards 16, 15, 16. I, I was a good student up until I got very, very bored, and then I lost interest. I still managed to get my grades, you know, sort of on par so that I wouldn't get in trouble, you know, again, not get in trouble. Um, but I wasn't, I was getting disconnected from school. All I wanted was real life sort of, you know, focus on money and stuff. So I didn't go to college or anything like that when I was at that age. It was all about working and, you know, creating a life for ourselves, essentially.
So, you know, kind of money was, you know, first and foremost in your mind, unsurprisingly. So you went, I think you left France, right? And then you worked in sales jobs and, you know, really chased that opportunity to make money, I guess, believing that that was going to give you, I guess, the security that you wanted. So, you know, to tell us about, you know, what you did there. And I guess that was added incentive to work hard, right?
Yeah, and plus, you know, because of the context that I was in, I had friends whose parents were very wealthy, so I could see almost right there what it meant to be wealthy. You know, from a surface level, obviously, not understanding what goes in the background, if there was any divorce happening or if the parents were together, or whatnot. One of my friends had a beautiful car. For anybody who's into car, there was an SL55, and it was just gorgeous. And you know, I was probably 8 or 9, and he used to take us for a spin and so on. And he had restaurants, and I was like, wow, this must be incredible. I didn't know at the time that, you know, his parents were separated, and, you know, he was probably going through a tough time himself. But, you know, that's sort of being in that context and seeing what ultra wealthy are doing. You're like, these people have the best life ever. This is the answer to all of my struggles and all my mom's struggles. I remember my mom used to struggle with getting the car fixed, and that car lost its exhaust on the motorway. So it was a 106. It was a tiny car, but with no exhaust on the motorway, you know, it makes a ton of noise and it's very, very loud. And she came and picked me up from school in the car one day, and I was so embarrassed. I was like, Jesus, if we could only just, you know, get that sorted. So yeah, again, it's that contrast of not being able to afford to repair the car, and yet seeing people in, you know, supercars and Ferraris and stuff. And so, I guess after I'd left school, I started to work in hospitality, because it was the sort of lowest entry barrier of entry, job. So I started to park cars and lift bags in 5-star hotels because obviously there's a bunch of them around where I live. So I had a friend who started to work in reception. So he got me in and I started to lift bags and I started to make tips. Probably 18 years old. That was my real job. I had jobs before that were not really real. I was working in a deli and working, in sort of the equivalent of a spa or mini market for a bit of cash. But that was the first real job that I had, and started to make real money at 18 or um, more than my mom was making at the time with the chips. Was obviously the wealthy tourism and tourists who would tip a lot. So for me, was like my life was sorted at 18 years old. I was making over €3,000 a month, and that was as it wasn't as much money as I could spend. So I sort of kept on doing that, and I did seasonal work. So in the summer, after the summer, I moved to Paris to do the winter season in hospitality. So I was holding doors in 5-star hotels, or go to a ski resort in Courchevel, which is like another fancy place. And I did that for a couple of years until I got a bit old. And at that stage, I was making more money than my mom at the time, and I was able to provide. And so, and looking back now, it was it was enough money to feel safe, but yet it wasn't feeling that way. It was more money than a ton of 18-year-olds were making. I knew for a fact, and yet the chase was still in me. I was like, that's not enough. I don't feel secure. I just have to keep on going. So I went to London eventually, and I lived in London for about 12 months, and I had an English speaking job that paid well. But there was this theme of, after a while, the dust settles, the routine settles in, and the money doesn't solve the issue. So what I did for a good few years is I packed up my life every few months and moved to different countries. So I lived in London, and I lived in Australia for a good while, and I did all jobs that you can think about, from working on a farm to carpentry to moving furniture, hospitality, and so on. And then I got into sales eventually in about 2015 because I wanted to take it up, a notch and really focus on that, earning, solid money. And so I did that, and I've been in sales for now 11, 12 years, altogether. And I sold anything from real estate to furniture to education, which I'm in now. So, it was all about that chase. And I only realized probably after 10, 15 years that it wasn't about the money. It was always that I always had the constant feeling of, this is not it. Like, I have to pack up my stuff and go. So it was great from that looking back from the perspective of, I got to live in different places and experience new cultures, and I was curious, and there was a great excitement around moving to a different country and having set up a new life. But then the feeling kept on coming back. So something had to change.
So was there a particular point where you thought, I've reached a level of comfort, security, but I'm still asking myself, is this it? And therefore, did you start to realize maybe it wasn't the money? It might be something else that you were chasing?
What's interesting is that I was very comfortable early. As soon as I started working full time, I had enough money to provide for myself and help my mom. And yet I still had the this isn't it. I need to do something else. This is not enough. I'm chasing that rabbit's tail. So I didn't realize until probably 10 years into it that the money wasn't the answer, that I had to shift my focus to something else. And I guess there's a few reasons why I get the I get the shift in perspective. I met my now wife, in 2015. And she pointed out that I was consistently looking at changing our lives upside down, and she probably needed a bit more structure, and through a good bit of pain, realizing that my work is important to me, and yet I thought the money was the most important. So because that was the only thing that I knew about, I was constantly chasing more, but it just wasn't hitting it. And then luckily, looking back now, COVID hit, and we got to slow down, and we were all at home. I was doing a bit of work because I could, and it really it really sunk in that we were good. We had a roof above our head with food. We had more time to go out and go on walks. There was at the time that we had in Ireland, there was restrictions. You can walk more than 5 kilometers from your house. So, um, it's the first time in 15 years that I got to slow down and just be like, this is actually perfect. I have everything that I need right now. I don't know why I'm chasing anything else. Um, and yet on the other side, I was still tormented as to, I need to do something else. And, that pull towards something better in my mind. And I realized that it wasn't money that I was chasing. It was a sense of security and safety. Now, I was lucky enough that I realized that at about 28 years old. And I think the realization doesn't necessarily come at that age for a lot of people, or maybe it does. I don't know. You probably have more experience than myself since you speak to a bunch of people like that. I felt like 28 was a good age to reassess and change direction in life. So COVID helped. My wife obviously was tremendous support in all of this and letting me know that it was okay to just consider a career change and not focus entirely on money and earning, and redirect my focus towards something else.
So for people listening to this, what did it feel like, day to day? What signs might people listening to this recognize in themselves that you now recognize was, unfulfillment, was you were not chasing the right thing? How might people recognize, some of their own signs and think, maybe I'm experiencing similar?
Good question. For me, the surface feeling was avoiding boredom at all cost. I could not get bored. Boredom was, it might sound a bit silly, but boredom was like death for some reason. As soon as I felt bored, there was an urge a painful sort of need to do something about it and to get productive and get active. And I was I was restless, and the worst days was during that time was Sundays for me, because I would wake up in the morning and I think about going back to work, and I used to drive my wife nuts because I was cranky and um, just not nice to be with, and having to think about work and having to go back. And I really didn't like the job that I had at the time. And Sunday was the only day that I had to slow down, I guess, and let the emotions come up. And for me, it was anger and being cranky and avoid boredom at all cost. But what happens is, if you keep ignoring this, for me, what I kept on ignoring this, it just built up and built up until I had to go on holidays and ignore my life altogether, or consider moving again to a different country to have that sort of that outlet, and I knew that I had to stop this pattern of, you can't pick up your life every 6 months because your job is boring you and because you don't feel like you're having an impact, or be angry at the people you love. You have to address what's going on inside. So for me, it was boredom, anger, frustration, not wanting to go to work. But that's scary, because then on the other side of that is total uncertainty. So then what?
And I guess a lot of people, certainly kind of earlier on in your career, 20s, 30s, even 40s, it's all about the career, right? Because we're all told if you work hard, you'll get rewarded, and the reward is money. But that's kind of at the cost of other means of fulfillment, right, in your life, and therefore you don't look to it. And I guess some people might have families, and family's job, there's not a lot of space for anything else. But I guess, did you look to fill that boredom with something else, or were you just solely kind of obsessed with working, generating money, career?
I felt that a bit with a lot of education. Actually, as soon as I started sales, I was really into, I read a ton of books. I attended a bunch of conferences. I started to sort of feed my brain with curiosity. Still sort of aiming at business and making money. That was the primary sort of drive. So I would, be curious about ways of helping towards that. That helped a lot. I think a lot of my focus went into reading and educating myself. And because I didn't go to college, I felt like I had a ton of things to learn. And it was obviously, if you're really willing to spend money, it was at a time where sort of I was going to say infotainment, but it's not infotainment. It's more so courses and, people with a bunch of, how would you call them? I guess, uh, infopreneurs was very, very dominant at that stage. So there was a bunch of money that I could spend on. So there was a lot of that was spent on this. I'm lucky that I don't have a huge amount of, addictions or unproductive behaviors. I play a bit of golf. It get boring pretty quickly. I still enjoy golf now, but not to fill that void. So curiosity, and it was all one thing that I got into as well. I was trying to come up with the next opportunity that would make money. And, it's sort of, you start to go into, oh, that's a very shiny object. And that's also a very shiny object. And spending a lot of time trying to see how you can make it work and, trying to get into a new venture and so on. So there was a lot of that.
When we talked before the podcast, one thing that really struck me was your description of kind of having to grieve the loss of the person that you spent years becoming. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. So what I mentioned earlier was once you look past the boredom and the anger and trying to distract yourself with all the things that I just mentioned, the books and curiosity, it's a scary thing to sit in your emotions, especially, I guess, as a man, because, we're less encouraged to do so growing up. It's a scary thing to look at, feeling inadequate or, letting go of what you've spent so much time focusing on and trying to accomplish of your own will, not because something has happened to you, deciding that this is not the right path for you. And you've spent so much time trying to create certainty and safety. And then you're like, do I have to let this go? This part of me, is this something that has to die? Do I have to, am I still going to be an achiever at some stage? Am I still going to like to compete, or am I becoming, what's the next chapter? And sitting in that discomfort of, okay, I have to let go of that, having to create so much certainty for myself, which is my primary, the things that I need the most, to moving into total uncertainty. What do I do now? Where does this take us?
And that's tied up in identity. That a lot of that's driven by who, and I think a lot of men struggle with that. Who, what is my identity if it's not my job?
And what are people going to think of me? What's my wife going to think of me if I'm not that person that I sold her on when I initially met her? Is she going to stick around? Are my friends going to look at me the same way if I'm not that sort of driven, ambitious person anymore? What do I do for work now that I don't want to necessarily spend my entire career focusing on being competitive and achieving? Yeah, it's a scary place. And I was lucky that my wife held me during that time. She was just there for me while I was trying to figure it out, and she was supportive of everything that I threw at her. It was a million things that I threw at her. I'm going to do this, or no, I'm going to do that, so I'm going to try this, or because I had no clue.
I know, and what we haven't mentioned is, you this kind of led you towards, the field of psychotherapy, and that's kind of what you do now. But what, if people listening to this who feel the same, I don't want to do what I'm doing, but I don't know what I want to do. How do you go through that? How do you manage to move forward? Are there, obviously everybody's journey is individual, but what tips have you got? What can someone do today just to start that process? Because it's really difficult. If you've done the same thing for 20, 30 years, you know what you don't want to do, but perhaps you've no idea what you do want to do.
100%. It's very scary because, especially when you spend so much time creating, certainty and goals and things to aspire to, when all of a sudden you don't have anything to aspire to, it's very scary. For me at the time, I didn't have a lot of tools. I think I came across a blog post that the title of it must be "Find Your Life Meaning" or life purpose, and with 10 questions, one of those ones. And I answered the quiz, and it wasn't really relevant apart from one section that mentioned one of the good ways to look into it is probably to go back to your childhood and see what you enjoyed spending time doing when you had no agendas or free time. And for me, I was like, okay, I've always been into cars. I love that. Video games, okay. But there was a common thread. I was always with people, and being an only child, it probably meant, a lot for me to spend time with friends. But the main thing is people always talk to me about their life, about everything. I was always a bit the sort of the confidant. Um, and so I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. Even, when I was 13, 14, the pretty girls in school would talk to me. The bad boys and the troublemakers would talk to me as well. I have a decent sense of humor, so I was able to talk to anyone. And so I was like, okay, that's one thing to go off on. And I know it seems so insignificant, but to me, it meant a lot because it's something that came naturally to me. And I used to spend a lot of time talking to my friends, at nighttime over everything. So I found that I had the natural inclination towards listening to people.
And that started you, I guess there were a few steps then towards thinking about a career in that then. I mean, how did you make that connection between realizing that you were good at, talking and listening to people, and then, retraining as a, a psychotherapist, professional?
The next thing that I did that I didn't realize that I did at the time was really to evaluate my values and what I like spend time doing. And it's a redefinition of identity through not actions, more so values, which is a tool now that I'm able to offer to others, but I didn't really integrate at the time. And the question was, okay, so I like talking to people. What else is important for me? Is it connecting deeply with people? Is it spending time, is it helping, serving? Is there an element of that? Is it being, and for me, it was obviously I worked in hospitality and service a long time. So I realized that there was that thread as well of being of service to others. But also what's important for me was sort of a deep connection to people, not just surface level. And I think choosing a career that was superficial, I'm not trying to be derogatory or anything, but providing a SaaS solution to a business wasn't really resonating with me. I want a deep connection with people, because that's what made me feel alive. And we can go into some of the deeper reasons as to why that's the case, but just for the purpose of the audience, if I knew this was a value of mine, I wanted to be of service, I wanted to connect deeply with people, and I knew I was a good listener. So that was three things that was sort of aligning me towards those professions of, counseling and psychotherapy. So it's really sort of pulling thread out of the darkness. It's a sort of small glimmer of light that are popping up like that, and you have to follow. And it's a slow process, and the main thing is having somebody on my side that was also holding me in hand and saying, "It's okay, just take your time. You're good. It's all right. You'll figure it out."
I think that's a very good point, actually. That we live in a very kind of instant gratification society now, and something like this does take a long time, right? And you have to. I've talked to many people about this, but you've got to invest in yourself, and that could be financially. But for a lot of people, for a lot of men, it is quite, that there are almost barriers to do this because they have financial responsibilities to, a mortgage and a family and whatever else they might have. So it's difficult, right? I mean, how do men? You might not have the answer to this, but I mean, how do you kind of balance working out what you really want to do and finding those little glimmers of, yes, this could direct my future, this is my identity, these are my values, with, yeah, that's all very well, but I've just got to keep on this treadmill because otherwise I can't pay the bills.
Yeah, with great difficulty is the answer. It's I guess I was lucky enough that okay, so for a bit of context, during that time, I decided I reached a transition, and so psychotherapy was sort of a loose thing that I was planning on doing. I changed jobs. I had a job that wasn't very interesting to me at the time, but that paid better, so our expenses were looked after. And I was like, I need to retrain. I need to do something complete, and I didn't have a huge amount of expense. It was myself and my wife, except she then became pregnant, so a child was coming on the way. So obviously, I had to navigate the having to provide now for a family and having a child on the way, and also looking after myself. So what ended up happening is that I started a new job that paid more than the one that I was on, thanks to my career progression. And then I had to go up with a new house, and then I also wanted to retrain at the time. So I had, which is pretty significant life transitions on their own, having a child and moving house and changing job and having going back to college. And I did it all at once. So the first year was absolute chaos because sleep, trying to figure out being a parent, sleep deprivation, having to work a full-time job as well to maintain the ship afloat, and studying part-time, a new course, a 4-year degree. It was very hard. But one thing that I would mention is part of being that sort of provider and part of being ambitious is you build over time. Well, or maybe it's in it, I'm not sure, but you have the skill of hard work. So you, you know, once you focus your hard work towards something that can be of service to others and productive for yourself, I think you're able of getting it done. It's very difficult and you need support as well. And you need to be more self-aware, and basic things such as getting sleep and working out and eating well, support you in all of that. It's probably the base layer. So yeah, I hope that helps a bit with the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. So do you think, going back to your, how you were brought up, your childhood, do you think, was that something you thought you had to kind of overcome? Or do you actually think what you experienced as a child actually, was responsible for, the strengths you've just talked about?
Going through it doesn't feel like it's something that you have to, you don't feel like you're building skills, and you don't feel like um, you don't feel like you're building a portfolio of skills that will help you later in life. You're just trying to survive for an extended period of time. Looking back, it's all different. You realize all the things that you had to overcome to become the person that you are today, and then you can shift your skill set that you've now acquired, to do something else. While you're going through it, you just going day by day. Sometimes it feels a bit unfair, and yet you're aware of the privilege I was aware of the privilege that I had because I grew up in France. I went to school; it was free. It was free healthcare, free education, and access to opportunities, which is already a significant amount of privilege. So, life isn't fair, but yet you're privileged. You're not aware that you're building skills, and yet when you look back, you're like, wow, all of these things happen so that I can become the person that I was meant to be, without getting too esoterical or spiritual.
And so now you help other people. You help with similar sorts of challenges.
Yeah, I still have a sales role where I'm involved in medical education, where we provide online education to medical professionals, so doctors, nurses, pharmacists, etc., all over the world, which is something that to me is also I'm quite passionate about, because there is an element of a social mission attached to it. You help doctors trained up, and then they're able to have an impact on their patients and so on, and also feeds my sort of competitive / business driven identity that is still within me, but not all of me. And I'm also able to after retraining 4 years into my psychotherapy degree, I so have clients, sort of traditional therapy clients that I help with a range of issues, but I'm specifically interested in those areas of fulfillment and life transitions and burnouts, because that's usually how it shows up in people, or stress, or sometimes it shows up in relationships. So yeah, it brings me it helps me with the depth of connections, things that I mentioned earlier, and be able to listen and feel deeply connected to people, and hopefully provide a space for them to go through that transition, and also a few tools, because the majority of it for me was my wife providing me that space, to explore, and that therapy can't do that for you. It's really sit there and have an hour or 50 minutes to yourself and make space for what's going on inside, whereas you don't necessarily have the time alongside in your life to let that happen. So,
and do you think, I mean, how difficult is it to, work all this out by yourself? I mean, how important is it to either come to see somebody like yourself, or just having, as you said, someone on your side, whether it's your partner or, friend or whatever?
hmm. I think it probably depends on each and everyone's experience and level of self-awareness. It is difficult and it does take time, and having somebody who's trained to provide that space for you in a bit of perspective when you need it is very valuable. I myself also attended a lot of therapy, and it helped me greatly to be able to identify patterns and, move away from sort of things that are no longer serving me, and having somebody that looks at you and just, there's no judgment, they just look at you and say, yeah, I got you. Whatever you just said, you dropped a bomb on me, and that's okay. We're trying to do that. It's very important. I'm not trying to promote therapy as in everybody should go to therapy, but if you feel like you can't make sense of what's going on here, there are people out there that are trained to help you do that. So I would really, I'd recommend visiting one. And the main thing is really to find somebody you click with. That's probably the most important thing. Like you meet with somebody, and if you feel like it's not easy to talk to them, and if you feel like you're not really getting a personal connection, find somebody else. That's probably the most important piece of advice around finding a therapist.
So someone listening to this who has achieved things in life, maybe from a work perspective, maybe from other perspectives, but they're still feeling disconnected with themselves or unfulfilled, dissatisfied. What would you want them to know?
It doesn't have to be this way forever. If there is pain or suffering, that's probably a clue that something needs addressed. It's scary. Especially, I guess for men, it's probably even scarier because we have in our culture, the role of also providing sort of that direction. If you're a provider, if you're a father or husband, you also it probably is your role to come up with the sense of where we're heading, and all of a sudden looking into darkness and be like, I don't know where we're heading is scary. So it will require vulnerability. Vulnerability is strength, however. I know it's sometimes been portrayed as a weakness, but it really isn't. It's a hard work to get comfortable with the uncertainty and sort of the what's going on inside, and having to stare at it, not try to fix it. That's important. Not try to fix it. Not trying to distract yourself with, as you mentioned. It could be cars, it could be sports, it could be whatever it is that you're trying to distract yourself, but pay attention to what the emotion is telling you.
Tom, if people want to contact you, I don't know if you work just in Ireland or people, it doesn't matter where people are, how do they find out more? How do they contact you?
I have a website for my therapy work. It's my name, so Tom Papasian, psychotherapy.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have a chat there. I post every once in a while on thoughts and stuff like that. That's probably the best thing. I have a very small sort of client space, because I also have a full-time work alongside. So anybody that wants to reach out, and if I can be of any value to anyone regarding tips or strategies or anything like that, you're most welcome to reach out. Yeah.
Right, great. I'll put the link as well in the show notes. Well, Tom, look, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for being open about your life, and really great advice, actually, really tangible advice on what you can do if you're feeling the same as you did. So thank you very much for sharing that.
My pleasure. I hope I didn't go too technical and really trying to stay with the basic stuff of my experience anyway. So I hope I provided a bit of value to the audience.
I think so. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you'd like to learn more about Tom, you can visit his website, tompapasianpsychotherapy.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn. To help raise profile of the podcast, it really helps, as ever, if you can please review it, follow the show on your podcast platform, and please share it with your own networks and people you think might benefit from listening.